Employment Relations Continuity of Labour Amendment Bill, first reading.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Employment Relations Continuity of Labour Amendment Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee to consider the bill. Mr Speaker, before I talk about this bill, I just want to take an opportunity to acknowledge the contribution made by the Right Honourable Winston Peters during that last debate, because I didn't get an opportunity to participate in the fun. But, you know, my colleagues will probably frown at me over this, but whatever you want to say about Winston Peters, he at least knows what he believes and he knows what he stands for, and he comes here to the House and defends it. So good on him. My colleagues probably will frown at me at that, but I didn't get an opportunity to participate in the fun earlier in the night. Mr Speaker, on this bill, the National Party has a strong tradition of supporting employment relations policies that bring greater fairness, freedom and flexibility to the employment relations framework. You can hear the union lackeys across the road shouting and screaming, because that's all they're here for. But, Mr Speaker, that's what the National Party believes in. It's in exactly that same vein that I give this speech and support this bill here in the House today. Mr Speaker, a flexible and fair labour market is critical for building a stronger and more competitive economy and creating jobs. And if the opposition actually cared about workers and cared about jobs, they would be supporting this bill, because it is absolutely pro-worker. Mr Speaker, a fair and flexible labour market helps increase wages and encourages innovation. It doesn't matter how much they shout about it, that is the absolute truth. Mr Speaker, this bill is very simple and only has one substantive clause. It repeals the current Section 97 of the Employment Relations Act 2000. Section 97, as it stands, is a heavy-handed piece of law that creates an imbalance by providing unions a significant legislative advantage during negotiations. If this bill successfully navigates its way through the parliamentary process, it will bring a better balance to employment relations law in New Zealand. It will bring a better balance to ensure that those who wish to work are actually able to do that. Those who wish to offer their labour in the employ of an organisation simply trying to make ends meet and make a business work, they'd be able to do so. Mr Speaker, there are some very real
Order.
Mr Speaker, Andrew Little over there, failed so many times to win a seat. All he's good for is coming here to yell and scream on behalf of the EPMU that he was here to represent. He didn't do a particularly good job when he was their president, so he comes here to yell and scream. Mr Speaker, there are some real reasons why Section 97 of the Employment Relations Act is a bad piece of law. Section 97 removed the right for employers to bring in outside labour, including volunteers, during strikes or lockouts, to maintain business continuity. It allowed unions to hold employers to ransom by being able to make unreasonable demands, knowing that if they strike, an employer would struggle to keep their operations running. This particularly affects the primary production industry, because reduced or no production in a factory could mean millions of dollars a day in lost or wasted products. Section 97's restrictions can lead to considerable lost productivity, an increased risk of protracted disputes, and considerable impact on the financial position of a business and its employees. It also removed the right for employers to test the market to determine if a union's demands are even fair or reasonable. Ultimately, though, Mr Speaker, Section 97 moved the balance too far in favour of unions and employees, that it produced a law that even competitors in other countries do not have to comply with. Mr Speaker, removing the current restrictions placed on employers from engaging temporary employees will allow an organisation to maintain business continuity and avoid costly, drawn-out industrial action. But more importantly, if a willing worker wants to work during a strike, this removal of Section 97 would give them the freedom to choose to do that if they wanted to, and it's a freedom that this House should be supporting. I realise it might be a foreign concept to our friends in the Labour Party, but if a willing worker and a willing employer want to enter into an agreement, an employment relationship, they should be able to do so. At the moment, Section 97 restricts an employee and an employer from doing that during a strike. The current law doesn't allow someone to choose to work during a strike unless they were employed prior to the strike commencing. Now, this isn't a new concept. It isn't something that was dreamed up recently, a couple of days ago or anything like that. Actually, Mr. Speaker, allowing people who want to work during a strike was always an option under New Zealand law, except for the past 12 years. Although New Zealand has had industrial relations legislation for over 100 years, there has never been an equivalent to Section 97, including laws passed by the first, the second, the third and the fourth Labour government. Those four Labour governments never saw fit to pass such a heavy-handed law. It wasn't until the fifth Labour government, heavily influenced by the unions, heavily influenced by people shouting and screaming like Andrew Little, that the fifth Labour government passed such a heavy-handed piece of legislation. It was a substantial change to New Zealand's labour laws. It was very much a change that was ideological and union-driven. And until 2000, employers always had the right to engage temporary replacement labour during strikes. They don't like hearing the truth, Mr. Speaker, but that's the fact of the situation. I'm sure that Labour will try and spin it a certain way, but the reality is that the people most affected by Section 97 are those who want to work, those who want to offer their services during a strike. They're the ones that should be given the flexibility to choose to work if they want to. Low-paid employees are the people that are the most in need of regular earnings. And if a small change to the Employment Relations Act means that the likelihood of strike action or long drawn-out strikes is reduced, then we're doing a huge amount to help those people, the lowest-paid workers, because they'll be able to keep working if they want to. Mr. Speaker, I also think it's worth remembering that the number of union members in this country that benefit from the protections of Section 97 is very low. Union membership in the private sector currently sits at about 8 to 9%. They are the only workers that benefit from Section 97. Given that only a union may negotiate a collective agreement, and only during the negotiations for a collective agreement can a strike take place, the protections of Section 97 are therefore only a small minority. The other 90% of workers in the private sector that are not union members are restricted and have their rights taken away from them if they want to work during a strike. That's the problem, opposition members. The problem is that Section 97, which you were defending so heavily, it actually restricts the ability for people who want to work to be able to take that option to do so if they want to, Mr. Speaker. The arguments put forward by Labour and the left in the lead-up to this debate have been very inaccurate and bordering on scaremongering. Calling it anti-work and calling it a scab bill, as has been the case, is just demeaning of hard-working New Zealanders. It does nothing but paint the opposition as ideological and unreasonable. What is unreasonable about allowing people to choose to work if they want to? Nothing is unreasonable about it. Mr. Speaker, during the Employment Relations Bills debate in 2000, a number of members highlighted the problems that they saw would be created by this section. I think Peter Brown of New Zealand First actually summed it up the best when he said that Section 97 has the potential for a few employees to, in some circumstances, hold the employer, the industry and sometimes the country to ransom until their demands are met. Mr. Speaker, I think Mr. Brown put it so very well when he was debating the legislation. There are real examples of this happening across the country, real examples where workers are not able to work if they want to. I don't want to go into individual disputes because that means we just end up debating the merits of the different negotiations. But, Mr. Speaker, there are real examples where an employee and an employer want to have people working but simply aren't able to do that. There are real examples where negotiations have led to a situation where long drawn-out strikes have led to a huge amount of lost productivity, a huge amount of inaction in a business, and that affects thousands of people. It's not just the people who are on strike, it's not just the shareholders of an organisation that are affected. Anyone that has any sort of relationship with an organisation, whether it be family members, whether it be other people who get their goods or services through a business, they're all impacted by a long drawn-out strike. if we can have a change to the legislation that reduces the likelihood of long drawn-out strikes, that means people can work if they want to, that means that businesses continue to be productive and keep their businesses going if they want to, that can only be good for New Zealand, that can only be good for workers, and if the opposition cared about jobs, if they cared about the economy, they would be supporting this bill.
Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Order. I call the honourable member Andrew Lee.